So my name is Anna Becker, and as Michelle said, I'm the Community Conservation Coordinator at the Los Angeles Zoo. Let's see if I can remember all of the buttons not to push and the buttons to push to move my slides here. I'm so glad to see everybody here today, and I'd also like to thank my dad who flew in from Chicago to support me today. Hi, Dad. So I am really excited to be here. Today I'm going to be sharing about centering justice and local conservation. And and I do just want to quickly acknowledge that while I can speak to my experience as a member of the LGBT and gender nonconforming communities, it is important that I do acknowledge that my privilege as someone who is white, I cannot speak directly to the experiences shared by communities of color, and also that my commitment to anti-racism and diversity is ever evolving and always in process. So I was 13 years old when I first learned about what conservation was for the first time. And I've dedicated my life to fostering relationships between people and wildlife and nature. Is something that has changed my life. I love my career, and I'm honored to be sharing that with you today. And now I want to just do something a little bit interactive. So I'd like you all to just close your eyes. And I'd like you to imagine a person doing conservation work in your head. Don't think too hard about it. Just the first image that comes to your mind. Now raise your hand when you have that. Keep your eyes closed and raise your hand when you have that image in your mind. If you imagine keep your eyes closed and your hands raised. If you imagined someone that was white, put your hands down. If you imagined someone that was identified as male, put your hand down. Okay, so open your eyes and see that the hands that are still raised. Very small amount left. And the reason I bring this up is because when we think about the conservation fields and the environmental studies fields, it is one of the least diverse fields of science. And that is because we have there are a lot of barriers to being in this field. One of those is gender. Gender diversity, while it has improved in the last few years, the gains have really been predominantly for white women only. When we look at the environmental studies and conservation fields, historically, they are and still are predominantly white men. When we look at race diversity, we see that of the 3.2 million members and volunteers in environmental organizations, they are still predominantly white. And if you look at an overview of our perceived biases, it leaves us with even more to unpack. So throughout the last couple of decades, zoos have been evolving as their role in community resources, as community resources and conservation organizations, and this is something that we think a lot about. We've also seen a paradigm shift, not just with zoos, but in the conservation field in general. We've seen a paradigm shift in how conservation operates. Historically, conservation has really been rooted in colonialism, and as we're moving forward, we're seeing a need for conservation to be collaborative, for people to work together, for power to be shared. And we saw that in the pandemic, that kind of collaborative work and working with communities, that was actually something that was really paramount to conservation success throughout the pandemic, and especially with some of the programs that we had. If we did not have that community support and that community engagement, a lot of our conservation projects in the field would have failed. So right now, the LA Zoo is at this cusp of deep change as an entire organization, but we're also redefining what conservation means to us. With the looming threats of biodiversity, what does successful conservation look like in the future? We are engaged in numerous conservation initiatives and research and science and conservation education, field projects, advocacy work, and at the intersection of all of these areas lies a powerful opportunity for us to pursue and advance justice within our respective communities. Justice can represent very different kinds of work, engagement, and action with different organizations, communities, and geographical regions. So throughout this talk, I'm going to share about how the LA Zoo is thinking about conservation and why justice is a part of it. And I'll do this broadly. We do this broadly globally, regionally, and locally, but today I'm going to focus on our local conservation efforts. But before I begin, I'd like to just bring up some definitions. I'm speaking generally about justice right now, but I want to be clear about what I mean when I say each of these terms. So the John Lewis Institute for Social Justice defines social justice as a communal effort dedicated to creating and sustaining a fair and equal society in which each person and all groups are valued and affirmed. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations and policies. And this will be achieved when, one, everybody has the same degree of protection from environmental health hazards, and two, when equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. The Climate Justice Alliance defines climate justice as the disproportionate impact of climate change on marginalized communities. And finally, I'd like to specifically call out environmental racism. Environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on communities of color. On the left, you'll see a photo from the 2022 Los Angeles County Comprehensive Parks and Needs Assessment Plan. And this is from the Los Angeles County's 30 by 30 plan, which you'll hear a little bit more about with the 30 by 30 plan with California and later today. But this study focuses on priority areas in both conservation and restoration. And this chart you can see shows the environmental benefits and burdens in Los Angeles. And it's no surprise to see that the majority of the burdens in these maps are in the areas that are most densely populated. And most of these areas are East LA, South LA, and the San Fernando Valley. And people of color account for 84% of the population living in areas with the highest environmental burdens. So that brings me to why must conservation be rooted in justice? Most conservation challenges are rooted in human issues and require human-centered solutions. By focusing on justice and equity, we can tackle underlying causes rather than simply treating the outward problem and symptoms. The impacts of climate change are and will continue to be felt disproportionately by those who experience environmental racism, socioeconomic inequalities, higher levels of environmental hazards, pollution, and environmental degradation. For conservation to be successful, we really need solutions that include healthy futures for both people and wildlife. And we want to make that impact large enough, and if we want to make that impact large enough, we need to be addressing the threats facing biodiversity, and we need everyone to be a part of this. So what are we doing? The LA Zoo's vision statement is to create a just and sustainable world where people and wildlife thrive together. We are in the 6th mass extinction event at a rate that is 1,000 times higher than previous events. Biodiversity is declining worldwide, and wildlife and humans are struggling to coexist. In California, wildlife faces extreme pressures from pollution, human development, rising temperatures, increased drought, threats of sea level rise. Hopefully I'm not giving everybody ecophobia. But the LA Zoo is aiming to work alongside communities to maximize our impact in efforts to mitigate and reverse threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. The LA Zoo just launched, in 2021, we launched a 5-year conservation strategic plan, and we identified 6 focal areas that we are uniquely positioned to affect change in by working with our communities. One, and it's not an accident that this is number 1, is social and environmental justice. 2, California conservation. 3, illegal wildlife trade. 4, conservation translocations. 5, human and wildlife coexistence. And 6, evidence-based conservation. So not only are we thinking about this strategically, but we're also thinking about our outcomes. We created logic models and outcomes to align and focus our work. What we choose to focus on is a demonstration of our priorities. And so in this, you could see in this on the screen, these are all short to long outcomes and impacts, and I've pulled out just a few to give you an example, but in every program and everything that we're doing, we are aiming for these outcomes, and it's a way for us to track our impact. So that first one, diverse representation and inclusion in the conservation field exists as a majority. More communities the zoo works with see improved environmental conditions. Equitable and supportive pathways to conservation careers and other engagement opportunities exist and continue to evolve and improve. And communities are better equipped to take action on their own. So how are we doing this? What is our process? How are we measuring this impact? So we talked a little bit about strategic planning already. We're incorporating justice-aligned outcomes and strategies in our planning process to hold us accountable for our impact. And our drive is driven by our guiding principles, which are to respect people, their land, the wildlife they share it with, and their pursuit of equitable livelihoods. Conservation is at our core. Conservation starts at home and extends around the world. Conservation is a team effort. We are both leaders and collaborators in conservation, and we are a zoo without borders. We're doing that through partnerships. We're changing the way that we work with partners and finding ways to build trust and long-term engagement, co-creating projects and solutions with our partners. We're asking questions like, where are the ways that we can amplify the work of others? How can we be resourcing their work? Are we asking ourselves, where is the power in the partnerships that we are in? We actually just completed a project in Baja California with the Peninsular Pronghorn that you see above me, and this was a program we've been involved with for 2 decades, a little over 2 decades, and it was to create a visitor center to better support economic and environmental empowerment that betters both the local community in that area, but also the critically endangered Peninsular Pronghorn. And this visitor center was recently completed for their upcoming tourist season. The zoo has also recently partnered with an organization called Outward Bound Adventures since 2021, or OBA. OBA is dedicated to providing access to nature and environmental education and exposure to careers in conservation for low-income, gang-impacted, and overlooked adults and youth. We have this 6-acre oak woodland space that we want to restore on our site, and OBA is looking for a long-term site to help train their youth and adults to learn how to do habitat restoration, to learn how to gain certificates for sustainable brush fire clearance. Finding ways where mutual partnerships exist, or mutual benefits exist, and how things align is really important. So we've put in for a multi-million-dollar grant to do this together from the beginning, and everything in that grant is co-created together. We do this with communities. The LA Zoo is a department of the City of Los Angeles, and we are continuously looking for ways to resource our communities. In Los Angeles, nearly 1.2 people reside in areas that are experiencing a moderate or high level of vulnerability to health, transportation, social and environmental barriers. So how can the zoo help to lower some of these barriers? How can we be a nexus point to also amplify the voices of our communities for the issues that they care deeply about? In November of 2022, last year, we launched a new program called the Teen Council for Conservation. It's 30 high school students from across all of the 15 council districts in Los Angeles. And the program was designed by a multitude of listening sessions that we held to hear from students in Los Angeles what they wanted to combat climate change, what they needed to help find a voice and find a place to do something. They are inundated with information. They know all about it. But what is the step? What are the tangible actions that they can take to do something about it? And so this program was born through those ideas. And the goal of the Teen Council for Conservation is to engage youth in Los Angeles to build a uniting conservation network that supports new generations in leadership through social and environmental action. Over the course of the last 7 months, the Teen Council has been collecting data that's important to the metrics specifically identified in LA's Biodiversity Index report, as well as targets for the Green New Deal. And some of these include collecting iNaturalist observations to track indicator species across Los Angeles. Some of them are tracking soil health in each of their neighborhoods, and some of them are collecting data on air quality in their spaces. The Teen Council is also focused on raising awareness of a conservation issue that's impacting them greatly. And this year they chose to focus on access to green spaces. And we will host an event with their respective council district representatives and communities to illuminate this concern. And lastly, capacity building. With an increased focus on local conservation, much of our work is centered on building trust in relationships with local communities, nurturing connections to nature, and building equitable opportunities in conservation. Our team likes to use the phrase intergenerational stewardship capacity as a way to think about the sustainability of conservation efforts. Are we resourcing the generations that come after us to be able to do better than we did? A huge barrier to conservation is access and representation. So how can we work together to lower these barriers by creating spaces for individuals to gain paid experience, increased representation, and further our conservation impact within those communities? 2 years ago, we launched the first conservation internship, the first paid conservation internship for community students in conservation. Students shouldn't have to choose between a job and an internship for their careers. The impact of this internship has been very exciting for us. We've found increased empathy development, deeper relationships with nature, and a greater understanding of conservation and its intersection with social and environmental justice. One of the students last year shared that the internship really focused, this is what they said, this internship really focused on people like me, people of color, and it made me realize that it's really important that I'm here and that I can contribute to helping this field go to where it's going. Another student said, I feel like 10 years from now, this will be the experience that I talk about that impacted my life. Since then, we've been able to broaden our reach and increase our capacity. We're glad to announce that our 2023 cohort will increase from 2 in 2020 to 16 in 2023, which is 8 times what we were able to offer in 2020. Their interviews are currently being scheduled as I speak, and I hope that we can continue to experience the impacts that we've had on the lives of these individuals and more to come. I would be remiss not to talk about evaluation, at least just briefly. I only have so much time though, so in everything that we do, we are measuring our impact. It is one of the most important things. Is what we are doing impacting the environment? How are we impacting conservation identity? How are we building skills? How are our communities and the participants that we work with, the students that we work with, how do they feel like do they feel like they belong in conservation? Are we helping to build a sense of belonging in this field? Because for people like me in the LGBTQ community, I can guarantee you that many will tell you that they do not feel welcome in this field. There are interviews, I messed up there. How How can we continue to track our impact to ensure the work that what we are doing is aligned with our guiding principles, our logic models, our outcomes, and the needs of all of our communities? So as you think about conservation today, I'd like to challenge you to reflect on your place in it. What does that look like for you? How can you help to create a just and sustainable world where people and wildlife thrive together? Everyone deserves a place in conservation, and this is just the beginning. Conservation must be rooted in justice, and it is essential for us to have the greatest collective impact in all of our conservation efforts. Thank you.